Hello, this is Robert Holshouser, and so my project was largely centered around selenium testing and getting that to work, and especially Selenium Grid. Now, Selenium, as you probably know, but just to cover the base, is a testing framework that controls the browser, and Selenium has now got a thing called Selenium Grid where you can have different tests running in parallel. And so I kind of focused on three technologies, the first of which was SQL Server that was going to be tied to an application that was for the kind of had the idea in mind of a hypothetical chef at a high-end restaurant that would want to be tracking people's dessert preferences. And so with that kind of idea in mind, I started off by creating a SQL Server database in RDS. And I just did, of course, the free tier. And with this, everything really went pretty smoothly. The one thing is that I was a little surprised by was that you couldn't do any manipulation, you couldn't run any queries through the query editor here. You had to do all of that through Management Studio, which was fine. And so, as luck would have it, I seem to have misplaced the password, so I can't actually show you that one. But what I had created was two, with the idea of the part of the process that I was setting up would ideally have been pushing things from a local dev environment up to a test environment, and so that included having a local copy of the database. And so there's just one table and some some procs for some simple CRUD operations is really the essence of the database that I set up. And so that all was just chugged along real nice on that. Maybe spent a little too much time on the database stuff. That's kind of my background, so I drove a little bit too deep in there probably. But one thing that I did discover was in Visual Studio, the 2022 version of Visual Studio has the ability to just create a Docker container and run it locally through the Docker container that it creates. And so that was really handy, because then I could just come in here and run my Docker commands, and I could see what was running and so forth, and it was created really easily. That way, I didn't have a chance to fully complete the app. I think there's something that happens as a result of building it, because it does come up about every other time that I run it with the front end page. And so let's see if I can show that to you right here real quick. You can see there's some Docker kind of stuff that's happening. I have a good feeling about this one. I'm not seeing the actual... Yeah, there we go. Alright, so it's real simple. It is actually tied into the database, but didn't get to deploy it fully and have it work the way that I wanted it to, because what happened was I ran into an issue where since it's, the default way to run this was with Windows as the operating system for the container, and that didn't sync up very well. I think there's some special things that I would need to do. Played around with it a little bit, but I couldn't quite get it to work. You can see I have both of the databases, so I can set up their connection strings so I can easily flip back and forth between one or the other here. But this is kind of not the main part of it, but it is cool about the Docker being built in. So that was one piece and one technology that I kind of took a deeper dive into than what we did in class, was RDS and SQL Server. So then, as I started to mention a bit about, I set up a repository here in ECR, actually 2 or 3 repositories, a couple private, one public, and so I had a lot of problems getting, and never actually succeeded in getting, my image for my app put into, pulled out of here and into an EKS cluster. And I went through the whole process a couple of times of totally tearing everything down and rebuilding it. I got pretty good at it, so I learned quite a bit about that, including some of the, when you read through my write-up about it, you'll see some of the nuances, little nuances here and there that I discovered as I went along. But I did have some pretty good success here. The ideal way with, I'll just show it on my write-up here. If I can find it real quick. Going to file. And that's really, once I zoom to almost 200 now. Alright, got too far back. Bear with me just for another second. There's a cool little diagram in here that I found from a YouTube that I watched about this. And so with Selenium Grid, the idea is you've got your app here. Oh no, I'm sorry, this isn't your app, this is your Selenium Hub. And then you set up services, and then you can have multiple nodes running in parallel, coordinating through the service and the hub to run tests against your app. And so I was actually able to set this up, the framework for it, in my cluster here. And not that one, but that one. So when I connected, so when I run the kubectl get pods, what we have here, so what I should take a step back. So because I couldn't get the image up and working for the app that I wrote, the dessert preferences one, what I did is I basically recapitulated what Greg did when he went over EKS a couple weeks ago, and I stood up Nginx on one node, and then I stood up the Selenium Hub and a node that would basically have a Docker image for Selenium and Firefox, although I didn't label this one the best, so it's obvious, but this is actually Chrome. And so I did successfully in EKS create that architecture, which is pretty cool. I was pretty ambitious in my project definition and fell quite a bit short of what I had hoped to do, but I still had a tremendous learning experience and a lot of fun working on it. What else can I tell you? So to go, I guess, oh yeah, I can show you that. So this is, so that you can see here I have Engine X that's running from my cluster. So this is all ready to go. And I'll just refresh it to show you that it's live. One of the apparent downsides of running the Kubernetes cluster through EKS, I hesitate to say there's a downside to it, because from everything that I saw, EKS makes working with Kubernetes a lot easier in most respects than if you're just doing pure Kubernetes. But there's a thing called Minikube, which kind of shows a lot of the things that is available to see through the different windows that we have through EKS. But what it didn't do is it didn't make it so that you could see the actual Selenium the Selenium hub. You couldn't connect to it directly. You can only connect from what I was able to do internally through the cluster. And I think there's probably some ways around that, but I didn't get that figured out. So I feel pretty good about what I accomplished. I was able to take a pretty deep dive into 3 different areas of technology: the SQL Server with RDS, and playing around with ECR, and setting up some repositories and images, and of course Kubernetes. And at the same time, even though it's not part of the class, it's pretty cool to dig into Selenium. So I think I'm over my 10 minutes. I forgot to set a stopwatch as I started. So I'm pretty sure I am now. Well, I just also wanted to say it was a great class. I think I said that at the beginning, but just in case I didn't, it was a really great class. Really enjoyed it. And thank you very much.